mentioned, I've had a really weird and varied background. Schooling in engineering, worked in the medical system for 23 years. I've been teaching natural healing for about 25 years, and used to work with individuals. And so I've dealt with a lot of sick people in my day. My focus, as it turned out, was helping people with really severe health problems. It seems like people would come to me after they had kind of exhausted other avenues. And so it just seemed like I attracted a lot of really sick people. So I had to learn how to deal with really, really sick people and get them what they needed. And had great success with that. And so, so I've been doing this for a long, long time. And because of my unusual background in engineering, I would see things when I was learning about these techniques and supplements and various things, food and what it was doing in biology. And so I saw it differently than a lot of people in the natural health world. And so we're going to talk about one of the new and interesting areas of discovery with natural healing, with what I call ormus homeopathics, which I don't know anybody else using that phrase, but we'll get into what that means. But essentially, yeah, we've stepped into a realm where we've got these crazy threats to our health now, like geoengineering pollutants and nuclear fallout coming down on us, genetically modified food, genetically modified microbes, and things like that. So we've got to have a way of dealing with this stuff. And one of the things I'm fond of saying is when we encounter, or I should say the consciousness, the energy that creates the consciousness that creates these kinds of problems, simultaneously the solutions are always created, because the polarities of energy that flow through consciousness, they always come in opposite polarities, so you can't have one without the other. So you will always find solutions to whatever crazy, heinous problem comes our way, and in relation to our health in particular. So that's what I do, is I go either find or develop solutions for these threats. And so in the course of doing that, and looking at what to do about things like the nuclear fallout from Fukushima, and also Chernobyl and other nuclear fallout. Years ago, I had to deal with helping people with who were victims of Chernobyl radiation fallout, and learn how to deal with that. Then I wound up getting radiation poisoning myself, and I had to learn how to heal it within myself. And so through all these things, I kind of get thrown under the bus by spirit, and I have to figure things out, because I'm not going to volunteer for radiation poisoning or geoengineering pollutants or whatever. So, so anyway, because of my background, I figured some things out, and these ormus homeopathics are one of them that I see as a new cutting edge thing, that very cutting edge people and companies are coming up with solutions have. And so along with that is a form of energy that's being used a lot in energy medicine. It goes by different names, but some scientists now are calling it scalar energy. So we're going to get into that. So let's get started. First of all, a little disclaimer. Anything that I talk about here should not be construed as any kind of medical advice or health advice. This is just for educational purposes, for your reference only. We always want to do what the FDA wants us to, and the United States government. So, so we don't want to do anything they wouldn't want us to do. All right. So now, okay. So we mentioned ormus homeopathics. Well, what the heck is ormus? Well, ormus is an acronym for orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, and it originally was coined by an Arizona farmer named David Hudson, who was attempting to get gold out of gold mine tailings, the tailings being the gold ore after all the gold has been mined out of it. But if you notice, when you go and buy gold, you can never get 100% pure gold. It's always 99.999% pure gold, but it's never 100% pure gold. And it's because no matter how they purify the gold, there's always this little teeny bit amount of something else in there. And so they know it's there, but they don't know what it is, and they just say, oh, it's pollutants or whatever. But in fact, what it really is are these monoatomic elements hiding within the gold. And so David Hudson was this wealthy farmer who had the wherewithal to, first of all, in his attempts to extract this gold out of gold mine tailings, he discovered this white powder that would explode into a flash of light when it was exposed to sunlight. And it had a lot of really, really weird properties. And so he spent about $8 million researching with the top labs in the world to find out what this stuff was, and nobody could figure it out because all of the conventional ways that we use to analyze materials wouldn't work on this stuff because it's not conventional matter. It's this really weird superconducting material that is multidimensional, meaning Hudson and others have discovered this stuff exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions of time and space. And so it doesn't act like regular matter, and it has a lot of weird properties. For example, Hudson did some tests where they heated this stuff up, and it looks like a white ceramic powder. So when you take gold, for example, and you turn it into monoatomic gold, or any metal that can be turned into these monoatomics, they appear, rather than being metallic, they appear as white ceramic powders. So Hudson did a test where they put it on a scale and they heated it up, and the weight of the scale started decreasing with this Ormus powder on it. And as they heated it up, the scale went less and less weight until finally it went to zero, and this stuff disappeared. The powder physically disappeared. It became invisible, and yet it was still there because it was still pulling on this scale and actually made it go negative. So one of the properties of these monoatomic elements, these Ormus elements, is that they're anti-gravitational. So they want to levitate, and that's one of the unusual properties of them. And that comes, you'll see the evidence of that in nature in some cases, which we'll talk about. So it's multidimensional. It's weird stuff, but when you send these metals, which so far Ormus metals that have been discovered are the platinum group metals on the periodic chart, rhodium, iridium, osmium, palladium, ruthenium, and then gold, silver, mercury, copper. They can all be turned into this monoatomic form where they all become white ceramic powders. Even mercury, which, as we all know, is a silver liquid metal. But when you send it through certain processes, they will turn into these white powders. Now, there are alchemical methods for producing these powders, and there are natural ways for doing this, and that's what we're going to talk about, because the natural methods, in my experience, are the ones that are tried and true and really help with human health, whereas the alchemical forms can cause you major problems, and so we'll get a little bit into that. But at any rate, these monoatomics exist in soil, they exist in water, and they exist in air, they exist in our bodies, they exist in plants, and they exist in rocks. And they have a lot of interesting uses and applications. Now, as I mentioned, in this form, these powders, if they're true monoatomics, if they're not some compound form of them, then they will be superconducting, which simply means, on the one hand, that they can conduct electricity with zero resistance. And when you have that going on, you get a lot of really weird properties that will create superconducting fields, also known as Meissner fields. And these Meissner fields will create a very, very strong electrical potential, which can create very strong electrical charge, which can have some very interesting effects, which we'll get into. And I've encountered people who are working with these elements that have applied them in space travel, time travel, believe it or not, in communications and agriculture and materials engineering and healing, because these elements can be used. They can be ingested, for example, and they really accelerate healing and regeneration in the body if they're in natural forms. Because they're superconductors, they can, for example, help to create a cell phone that uses a different type of energy that is not conventional, and that type of energy is also multidimensional, and you can, for example, have a cell phone that can have reception, perfect clarity anywhere in the cosmos. You could be talking to somebody on Mars with a cell phone, and you're here on Earth with perfect clarity, because these waves don't travel through space. They're actually interdimensional, so they kind of pass through everything, but they're not like conventional waves that travel through space. They just kind of go between space and between dimensions. I've also met people who have developed, a couple of people actually, that have developed anti-gravity flying saucers using these elements. because they're anti-gravitational, and they also, because they're superconducting, can help create singularities or black holes that you can then envelope around a spacecraft and make it blink out and show up somewhere else in the cosmos. So there's a lot of really interesting applications. I also know of companies that are using these in agriculture, and when you feed them to plants, it will radically improve their growth and their strength and vitality. And you can get incredibly nutrient-dense food with this, and incredibly large, healthy plants with this. So we'll get into more details on that. And then, as I mentioned, for healing, because when you ingest these in their natural forms, they plug into the body, and they do things that really accelerate healing. Now, where are these elements created? And by the way, monoatomic simply means that these are elements where the atoms are not joined together. Normally with metals, they all have atoms, and all of the elements, they join together and have atoms that are joined together in some kind of three-dimensional grid pattern. And so that's what makes, gold, for example, look metallic and be hard and have all of its properties, is because those gold atoms are bound to each other, many thousands together in a particle, and they have some kind of three-dimensional pattern or a grid pattern that makes them look gold and metallic and shiny and all of that. But when you break them apart into individual atoms, that's when they become these white ceramic-looking powders. And so this is what I mean by monoatomic. It's simply making the atoms of these metals become individual discrete atoms, which according to conventional physics is impossible, because these atoms have very, very strong charges, and they really want to grab onto each other strongly and bind to each other really strongly. So it's very weird matter in that sense, and that's why a lot of conventional physicists don't know about it. They wouldn't necessarily believe unless they see extensive evidence of this stuff. So how are they created? Where do they come from? Where do these monoatoms come from? They're not just created in laboratories. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned, they're created all the time in nature. In soil, microbes eat rocks and soil and break them down into small particles that plants can uptake, because obviously plants can't uptake boulders, so they can only uptake through their roots minerals where the particle sizes are just a few atoms individually, or these individual monoatomic atoms. And when they get the monoatomics, of course, they become much stronger and healthier. So what kind of minerals are high in these monoatomics? Well, as it turns out, it's volcanic minerals. And so any kind of rock that's volcanic is going to have these ormus elements in them, and some more than others. And so, for example, volcanic ash is very, very high in these monoatomic elements. And when you see ash spewing up out of a volcano, for example, you'll see a lot of interesting effects. And one of them, you can actually go onto YouTube and search on this. Just search on volcano lightning or Iceland volcano lightning, and you can see that pesky volcano in Iceland that erupted a few years ago that was shooting ash all up in the sky and covering thousands of square miles and interfering with air traffic lanes and things like that. But that is actually a very, very beneficial remineralizing of the earth when that's going on. Volcanism is a fantastic way for the earth to remineralize itself, and in particular getting these monoatomics back into the soil. And so you can do the same thing. You can take these rock powders and spread them on the soil, feed them with plants, and radically increase the nutrient levels with them. So because these monoatomics are superconducting in that form, coming up out of that volcano, they create these very strong fields that have a very strong electric charge or potential of millions and millions of volts, maybe even billions of volts. And that wants to ground out. And so what happens is it does ground out, and it grounds out into the atmosphere because it's coming up from the ground. And so what you'll see is this lightning shooting up out of the volcano. And of course, scientists are baffled by that, and they don't understand it, but that's what's going on. So volcanoes create it. Microbes eating volcanic minerals in soil will create these monoatomics. Also, fermentation. You can actually feed these rock powders, these volcanic rock powders, or sea minerals to ferments, and the microbes will eat them and break them down into what are called angstrom particles, which are just a few atoms in a particle bundled together, or individual atoms, which are the monoatomics. And so you can do things with fermentation is unusual, like do your fermentation inside of a magnetic field or a scalar energy field, which we'll talk about, and you will radically increase the Ormus elements created. And also, if you feed your ferments seawater or rock powders while you're fermenting these magnetic scalar fields, you'll radically increase the Ormus elements in them, and then they become much more nutrient dense because the microbes will eat more and produce more nutrients and also break things down more fully to make things more bioavailable. So one of the things I'm going to show you is conceptually how to make your own medicines using fermentation.